Okay, Roy, what cemetery are we at right now?
Well, it's the New Beresina Cemetery, and it was founded by the Herman families around here when they migrated here from Russia in 1897, I think. They came here. And then shortly after that, the church was started here in the cemetery. And
And the
so
church was just to the west of the
ju-
cemetery?
about in the middle of that lot there someplace. There used to be a little building there, but it was taken down, so I don't rightly know for sure but it was within about, there was room to park cars on the east side of the building, and so the cemetery wasn't that close to the church.
So you attended that church then when you
I
were a kid?
did, yes, I did, all my growing up years, yeah. When I come back it had been going until I come back from the army. By then it had closed.
So what
People,
was church like when you were a kid?
well, we had Sunday school in German, and we had services and prayed, and it was a good time for young kids to grow up. I mean,
Was it something that you would do every Sunday?
unless the weather interfered, yes.
How far of a commute was it from your place, your farm?
Well, it was about 5 miles from the farm.
And how would you get to church?
Well, most of the time we had a car, but sometimes in the winter it was by a team of horses and a sled.
How would you stay warm on a team of horses and a sled?
Well, if it was real cold, they'd take some bricks and put them in the oven and warm them up, and then sit the kids in the sled and put a blanket over them with the heated bricks next to them.
Did you ever get burned by the bricks?
No, no, they weren't that hot.
Okay, okay.
No.
So you have a number of relatives buried in the cemetery, right?
Well, I would say 90% of them are probably some way related to me. I mean, the Chankey family, I'm related to. My sister was married to one of the Chankeys, Emil. They're buried here. Well, yeah, right behind the Emil and Ruth Chankey.
Okay.
That was my sister and her husband. And, well, this family, they were cousins to my mother,
And who is this?
Herman and Edna Chankey. Yeah. Yeah, he was a first cousin to my mother, and while there's a stone, Kellers, they weren't related to us, but over there's another Herman, that was my uncle, and that Brost family there, their mother was Matilda Herman that I talked about on that picture, and over there, that Herman, that's my cousin's wife is buried there, he's still living.
Okay.
And even that down there, you see that stone that it says Hoffman? His wife was a cousin to my mother.
Okay. So a lot of the family.
A lot of the yes.
Okay, and over here you have your grandparents, right?
My grandparents, Friedrich and Johanna Herman. You see that's spelled a little different in some of these. It's got the Errrmann, where some of these have shortened it down. I think Herman. No, that's still there, but there's some of the Hermans here that just H-E-R. Yeah, Tim Herman's over there, that's just Herman.
So do you know how your grandparents died?
How?
Yeah.
Well, my grandfather had been in the hospital for, I think he had some lung problems, and then while he was there, he had battled what you call it, a protrusion of the intestines.
Like a hernia?
Yeah, a hernia. He had battled that, and while he was up in the hospital, they thought they should take care of that for him too, up in Bismarck. And in those days they used to put him under with the chloroform, and for some reason he never woke up. And then Grandma lived a number of years afterwards yet, and she just finally, I think, died of old age. There was nothing, she never ended up in the hospital or anything. She just was staying with one of her sons, and the end came and she died.
1944, were you drafted at that time when your grandfather
No,
died?
they were drafted, but I wasn't old enough. I wasn't old enough until 46.
Okay. So did you attend your grandfather's funeral?
Yes.
Do you remember what it was like?
Well, that grandfather's funeral was still out here in this Beresina church.
Okay.
Yeah. I I think I probably was a pallbearer. I know I was a pallbearer on Grandma's funeral. And 19, yeah, I mean, her funeral was still out here, I think, because that Beresina church wasn't closed down until about 1952.
So what time of year did they die in? Was it spring or winter?
Grandpa was in the summertime. No, wait a minute. Grandma's was in the summertime, August, July, or somewheres in there. Grandpa's was in December.
Were they able to bury him right away?
In those days, they were out here with a pick and chopped in the frost until they had a hole dug by hand.
Oh. Was the funeral service in German?
Oh yes, when they were buried, it was in German.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did they sing old German funeral
Oh
songs?
yes, they sang German songs and yes.
Were you close to them as a boy?
Well, not really. I mean, I don't know. You know, they were old. At least I thought they were old.
They're the only grandparents that you got to know, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go down here to your sister's
Okay.
headstone. Ruth, what's her name?
Ruth Chanke.
Janky?
These, you know, I was talking about Aunt Elma that was working at the university. That's her grave, and that's the youngest one of the Hermans. He didn't get very old. I mean, when I look at it, he was in his 60s, but he had lived all his working years in Chicago, and well, I mean, he had some family down there, but that had sort of come apart. And then he had come back to Fargo to Bethany Homes nursing home. That's where he died, and then they brought him back here, of course. So did Elma. And oh yeah, there's another one. My Uncle Fred. No, he had been in the service here during the Second World War. He was over at Guadalcanal. He come back messed up with malaria. He didn't get very old either. He died in 1978.
He was 68.
Yeah, he was in his 60s, yeah.
So he served in World War II. So
Yep.
was he pretty old then when he?
Yeah,
served?
well, he was actually, you know, the draft in this was started in 1940,
Mhm.
and then after they were in service for a year or whatever it was, he was 28 at the time, so he was turned loose. But in late in the fall, when they sent some of those guys home, but then after Pearl Harbor, then he was called back to the service.
Were you close to him when you were growing up?
Quite so, yes. He'd come down and visit us, and you know, none of those guys got married very young. I mean, he got married after he was in the service, and so we were close to him, and you know, they were storytellers, and you know, we could sit on their lap and listen to them.
Well, did he ever talk about his experiences in World War II?
Not much. I mean, he saw some tough times at Guadalcanal. You know, he talked about, you know, some of the things that the Japanese had taken prisoners and what they did to them to scare the rest of the guys out. Wasn't nice.
This here is your
That's
sister?
my sister and her husband. She just, well, yeah, she died in 06.
How did she die?
Well, she was in a nursing home in Barnesville, Minnesota, and she had a number of health problems. I mean, she had heart problems, and then she ended up with emphysema and some breathing problems, and she finally just gave up, I guess. So.
She was the sister that was 10 years older than you,
Yeah.
right? Were you close to her?
Quite so, because they lived around here all the time until her daughter moved to Barnesville. That's how she ended up over in Barnesville in a nursing home rather than here. She had lived in Barnesville in assisted living there for a number of years because, you know, her husband had died over 10 years ago, or 12 years ago. Yeah.
So, with your sister, when you were growing up, did she do a lot of mothering towards you since she was so much older?
Well, to a large, especially school-wise, they kind of were parents to us, yeah. But and then, like I say, they stayed around Culm area all their life while they were married. So I was closer to them than any of the rest of them.
When you were growing up, what were some of the differences between what the girls were expected to do at home and the boys?
Well, in some families there wasn't too much difference because in our family the boys were all younger, so the girls were out there helping farming and harvesting, haying, and of course milking for sure. So it wasn't that much different. I mean, they were expected to work.
It was all
I
hard
know
work.
they used to say Dad was so glad when he finally had some boys. He had 3 girls before any boys came along.
You were his first boy, weren't you?
Yeah.
Okay. So Lorraine and Reuben, are they related
Uh,
to you?
well, Reuben is a brother to Emo here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But
they were related.
Lorraine's last name was Kletke, so she was no relation at all.
Okay. And then Mary and Kristen Nill, those are your parents?
That's my parents, yes.
Okay. Come down over here. How did your father die?
Pardon?
How did your father die?
Well, he had never spent a day of his life in a hospital. And they were living in town in the house we were living in. And one night he called up and he said, "Boy, I think I should take him to the hospital. He's hurting all over." And so I went and picked him up and took him down. Allendale still had a hospital at the time. I took him down there, and the doctor put him to bed, and he had all the classic symptoms. He said he had chest pains, he was vomiting, and he had pain in his arm. And I don't know, it never occurred to that doctor that he was having a heart attack. He put him to bed, said, "I think he's got a bad case of the flu." By 3 o'clock, he was gone. And Mother lived a couple of more years, of course, and the way it was more tragic than dying that quick. She lived in town another year by herself, and then she had a couple of strokes, and she ended up in the nursing home in Allendale, and she laid there for just about a year flat on her back and never said another word. They were feeding her on a tube, and those days they put a tube in, it took a court order or something to take it out. It wasn't living, but she existed. And they still do that to people, but I've made arrangements that don't happen to me.
When you think back to your childhood, what type of a father was your dad?
Well, he was kind of rough and tumble going, and he had grown up that way, and he just never was very close as a father. Mother was a lot more so.
How was she as a mother? What was her personality?
Well, she was real easy going, and of course, one of the things I think back, I mean, she could never quite separate the things away. She had so little need for anything. She didn't care about fancy clothes. She didn't care what kind of a car we were driving, and she just couldn't level that off with us that we should be that much different.
When you think back, your father was a farmer.
Yeah.
What type of a farmer was he? Was he?
Well, of course, he was a farmer with a team of horses, and if you had rocks on the field, you picked them by hand. He worked hard in his days. Yeah.
Did he? Was his farm primarily grains, or did he
Well,
dabble in cattle? Or
milk cows and cattle and grain. It was everything. Chickens, ducks, whatever you name it. They had it. They were pretty self-sufficient on the farm.
so you had chickens, you had ducks, you had cows, horses.
Horses.
What else? Anything else?
That's about. We never had any sheep when my dad was farming, but we had cows and mainly milk cows. It was the the big thing. And even after they got electricity on the farm, most guys went to milkers. Well, they milked a few cows by hand until almost the last day they lived.
When you were growing up, how did you have to milk the cows?
Oh, yes.
How many did you milk?
Oh, it probably amounted to 3, 4 for each one of us.
Okay, and how many times a day did you have to do that?
Oh, twice, morning and evening.
Did you like milking cows?
No, I didn't like milking cows. I knew there's one thing I wasn't going to do. And of course, I mean, milking changed a lot. Guys our son-in-law, they run a dairy operation out there, but it's still hard work. But I was so full up, if I'd have had to make a living on the farm with milk cows, I'd have left. I would not have.
So when you started farming yourself, did you have any cows that you had to milk, or?
No, well, we had one for the house,
Okay.
especially after we had kids. We kept having one for the house.
So did the kids do the milking of the cow?
Well, later on, I think I bought, milking machines were so cheap because everybody was selling. I think I bought one, and then they did learn it took more time to wash the milker than it took to milk the cow, but they used it to milk the cow.
Let's see, let's walk down over here real quick and see
That
what's...
Keldon family, that's the people that sent the memorial for putting up that sign up there in the marker.
Okay.
When they were young, they grew up on I think there's still an old house sitting over there. There's a farm over there. That's where those Keldon family lived. And Emmanuel Keldon froze to death coming home from town.
Really?
Yeah.
From Column?
Yeah. See, 1937, we had a fierce cold winter that winter. I don't know just what happened. I mean, in the morning, he wasn't home yet. He had been in town, and he had had a habit of sometimes staying a little later than he should have, so they weren't too concerned about him. But in the morning, then I think the horses had come home and were standing in the yard, and then they found him out. Had he fallen out of the sled or whatever had happened to him, but he was found frozen to death.
So were the Caldens friends with your parents?
Yeah,
or?
so, I mean, they were, Mrs. Keldon and Emil's mother were sisters, so they were related in that. But they all left the country, and most of them moved to Minneapolis. And there's still, I think one of the sisters, she's got to be up in her 90s, is still in a nursing home in Minneapolis. The men of the family, there was 3 boys, and they've all died.
So when you were growing up, did your parents entertain people often?
Well, on Sunday afternoons, people would come and visit and sit around and visit. Mostly, there wasn't much. There was no TV to watch and stuff like that. But there was considerable visiting among families. Yeah.
When your parents would have guests, did they were the kids allowed to be in the same room, or did the kids have to go off and do something else?
Well, most of the time we were scooted out of the way. The front room was just for guests.
And then the kids went out and just did whatever.
Well, if it was summertime, they'd be outside, and wintertime, they'd be upstairs in the bedrooms upstairs. So
Okay.
sometimes we'd listen in onto what the conversation was down. Sometimes it was rather interesting.
Did you learn anything interesting? Do you remember anything that?
Well, not anything that I would want to talk about. Now, this one here, I don't even. Oh yeah, these people had moved into the area. They lived right next to the farm that we were living on down there, but they came from north of town, and they had this baby that died, and they have been attending the church here. So, the mother to this gal still lives in Bismarck.
Really?
Yeah. Now, this family I know absolutely nothing about.
Okay.
August 5th, 1926,
It was the
and
year
died
you
the
were
same
born.
that no doubt was a child of the family, and I have no idea where they lived. There were some Hartmans living south of town. Still is. There's one guy. Yeah, I said that you only had that one guy. Wasn't, but Godleb Hartman south of town is 93 years old too. But I don't think they were any relation to these people. There was no connection.
Fair?
Yeah, that was a family that lived out east here, and they had attended the church here while they were living out there, and there were three of their children. They died at birth, and there really wasn't a marker out here until a couple of years ago. One of these children's sister, she was a couple of years older than I am, and she wanted to leave a marker here for the family. So that's we had a map of the cemetery, so we about knew. There were some lot markers put in at one time. They're not all over, like most cemeteries now are surveyed and lot markers, but there were a few of them. And now, I don't. Oh yeah, Conrad family, yeah.
Is that the same thing here?
Yeah.
Yep, Conrad.
Yeah.
Reinhold Conrad.
Well, Mrs. Conrad was also a cousin of my mother's.
Okay.
Yeah. And, well, yeah, this gal, this Katharina Conrad, she was born Herman. She was a cousin of my mother's.
Okay.
And she didn't die all around 91. Yeah, she got to be 100, right close to 100.
Yeah.
97 to 91. And that was their father. He was a World War I veteran, and he had some lung damage from gas, people war with, and he died quite young. I mean, they had five boys, and the last one, the oldest one in the family, was the last one to die. He died a year ago, and the others had some of them had died before their mother died.
Really?
Yeah. But they weren't, none of them, except this Wilbert that died here last year. They lived in Culm. He worked in the post office in Culm. But their father had been a World War I veteran, and he died of cancer when the youngest of the kids, I think, was only about 3 years old. So their mother had a rough time. She tried hanging on to the farm, but she eventually moved to town and did work whatever she could, house cleaning, so she could survive. There were some, in those days, a widow was in an awful bad shape. There just wasn't no jobs for them, and they had a struggle to stay alive. Yeah, like I said, this Ida was a Herman. She was a first cousin of my mother's.
Okay. So your mom's cousins, did you get to know them when you were growing up?
Oh yes.
Did they
But the ones that were around here, the ones that are buried here too, we got to know them real well. We used to get together with some of them guys and play baseball on Sunday afternoons. They even had what did they call it? It was all a baseball team that was almost all Hermans. They were all related to one another. They were all cousins at the most distant. They used to have a ball diamond over here someplace. I can remember going to that before I was able to play, and my dad played with them, and they had a pretty good team going. A lot of rivalry. Culm had a baseball team. Marycourt had one, and there was.
So when you were growing up, did you play ball yourself?
Not much. By the time I was old enough to play, and these other guys had kind of moved on, so I wasn't real good at batting anyhow, so I never.
John R. and Milton H.
Milton.
Yankee? No.
Oh no, that's part of that Chankey family. Yeah. That was. He died the same year that he was born. No, 1924.
Milton died the same year he was born. and then John.
Oh,
lived-
that's two different.
Yeah.
Yeah. The top one. Yeah. I can't remember. Well, yeah, he died in 1926, but I remember talking about it. He got to be about 8 years old. Huh?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then Milton, he died the same year that he was born, according to that. Huh?
Mhm.
1924.
A couple months after.
Months afterwards, yeah. And that was another son of the Chankeys that he died also, born in 29 and died in 29. And yeah, there's some more Chankeys buried here.
How about Luella Grace?
Oh yeah, Luella Grace. Well, yeah, she started country school the last year I went out there, so she was 7, 8 years younger than I am. But
Okay, so you really didn't get to know her too well because you were.
no. And after she got married, they moved out to Washington State, someplace I think.
Okay.
And
John and Lydia?
yeah, but they were Emil and Reuben Chanke's folks.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So those
And-
were your mother's sisters-in-laws.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that gal, she went to school the same. She was about my age, maybe a year younger.
Irma?
Yeah, and after she was through school, she went to Minneapolis, and she never got married, and she didn't come back here very much.
When you guys were kids, would you guys play together?
Oh yes, in school, and we had a little snow. We played fox and goose, and if there wasn't any snow, we'd play Andy I over. You throw a ball over the schoolhouse and see whether the other guys could catch it.
So is it like a baseball or
A softball.
softball?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, she went to. I mean, she was in school all the years that I was, but I mean, I graduated and she was still going to school.
Okay. Leona Miller?
Well, I mean, that's I don't know history on those people at all.
So the
I mean, I remember people talking about them, and there were a Miller family that lived north of here a ways, and they were members of the church, but they moved out to Washington. It might have been some relation of these, but I really,
yeah, they look
have
like
no-
most of them passed away before you were born.
yeah, I don't know.
Except for Leona. Okay, we'll head up this way. Here's another hermit.
You know, there's a lot of guys during the 30s, tried to get some trees grown on this cemetery, and there was so very few successful. And now when they started taking off, there's no end to them. They actually have become a nuisance.
Johann?
Yeah,
And Catherine?
yes. That, he was a brother to my grandmother, Herman.
Okay.
And, they both died very young, and their kids were left as orphans. See, they had come over with the rest of the Herman. I think he was the oldest one of that Herman family. But he died in 1916, and she had died already before. So they had, I think, 5 children, and they were left as orphans. And, well, some of them I never really got to know because they left as soon as they were of age that they got out of here. And some of them, orphan kids growing up in those days was not a good situation. They got kicked from one family to the next and some things like that. I know that one guy in particular, he stayed around here, and he wasn't, you wouldn't call him retarded, but he was a little slow, and boy, he was taking advantage of that. It's unbelievable. He worked for people and barely got enough to eat and put some clothes on him. Well, he's buried here too, but I don't know if anybody put up a marker for him or not. I thought they. Yeah. Oh yeah, that could be. Yeah.
Carolina and Johannes and Rudolph
Let's see.
and Albert.
Okay. Yeah. 1903, Carolina. These were children of that other Herman family, Johannes,
Okay.
and they had a daughter named Johannes and Rudolf and Albert. Albert was the guy that stayed around here. Well, he first died in 1980. He had never really gotten a hold of anything, and then just a couple of years before he died, Marycourt was going downhill and houses were dirt cheap, and some of the people that he had worked with and that didn't take that much advantage bought him that house and saw to it that he got a few bucks Social Security. He paid in 2 quarters and you could draw some, and he had it better in all his life, but he didn't get very old after that. 1999, 80. Well, he was 81 years old, yeah, for in those days. And under the circumstances, he really got quite old.
How about the Kellers up here? Did you know?
I know there were some Kellers around here, this family, but these names don't.
Well, the 2 were before your time too.
Yeah. See, 1934, but I mean, sure, I was 6. No, I was 8 years old by 1934. So, but I don't remember. They might have not even lived around anymore by the time these were buried here. Like 34, they probably just sent the body back and buried it here with the rest of them. But the Keller family, there isn't nobody by the name of Keller in Culm area now.
Really?
They either died or moved out. But there used to be a number. There were at least 3 Keller families. They lived up there and around that area.
When you were growing up?
Yeah. I mean, they were far enough away that the only connection we had that we were going to the same church, but we didn't go to the same schools. And
Like, did these their parents?
well, that's the father to some of those.
And then Amelia?
Yeah, and I'm Mutter.
So, Ru in Frieden, what does that mean? Ru in Frieden.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it says here. And Mutter is, of course, mother. That isn't much different. Yeah, I remember this gal. She lived in town quite a while after her husband had passed. He had a son that was named Henry too, and the young Henry, his wife just died about 2 years ago. But she wasn't buried out here. I think she was buried in that Culm Congregational Cemetery. Yeah, but of course, I mean, that's my mother's sister, and this is a cousin of mine, and no, that's the father, the headstone for the father. The mother, and Teddy, he was a deaf mute, and he could do sign language. They had sent him to school on time, but he had kind of a rough time in life. I mean, his mother, lived long. She took care of him. He died before his mother died. So, but he had I think he ended up with diabetes. Oh yeah, he died in the winter of '36. The coldest winter we ever had in North Dakota. And in those days they didn't have funeral homes. I can still remember I don't know whether he had been there all the time, but the day of the funeral they had the casket in the home.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. And then I know we went up there and it was so fierce cold. We went up with a team of horses, and I don't even remember whether we went to the funeral or whether we stayed at the family's house until the funeral was over with. But it seems to me when he died, they had to postpone that funeral 2 or 3 times because the date they were going to have it was a snowstorm.
My goodness.
Yeah, it was a nasty winter.
Herman here.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Oh yeah, that's Herman. That's Richard Herman. That was my uncle, my mother's brother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he lived around here all his life. And his wife Margaret, Muir, well, obviously that wasn't the German name. She came from the Lemoore area, but she got quite up there in age, because she just seems like it was a few years, well, 98. Yeah, even 98 is 9 years ago already. How time goes, ay, ay, ay.
So when you were growing up, were you close to Richard?
Yes. You know, all that basic activities that were going on were basically church centered, outside of the winter months in school.
Did you ever have to go help on your uncle's farms when you were a boy?
No, I mean, my brother did. He worked for Uncle Richard one spring, I can remember, but I don't know. You know, my parents were poor and had a rough time going, but they had something about sending children out to work that didn't have a good ring to it, because when they grew up, I mean, that was happened to them. I know my mother worked out a lot when she was a young girl, and boy, if they could help it, they didn't want their kids to work for somebody else. I mean, that hadn't put a good taste in their mouth.
Herman over here.
Well, yeah, well, this gal really died quite young. You know, she was way overweight all her life, and then once they built a new house in Colm, and I don't know, she had so many health problems that she just didn't last very long. She died in 201, yeah.
So how was she related to you?
Oh,
or
well,
what?
her husband was my cousin.
Okay.
He's still living, and his son lives over on the old homestead where the Hermans homesteaded.
So when you were growing up, would you play ball and hang out with James
Well,
at all?
well, you know, he was 5 years younger than I am, so we really didn't have. I can remember when all of Richard's kids were born.
Really?
One of the reasons I remember their mother, Margie, they were living on a farm down in that area where we were living, and I know we were there once, and she was pregnant with their first son. And, you know, that is the first time I ever remember seeing a pregnant woman, you know. You know, she was, and that's stuck in my memory, but I can remember that. Yeah, there's some things that just stick with you for a long time.
It's funny what actually ends up
Yeah.
with you.
Now, this is some more of that Herman family. My grandfather's brother, the right there,
Teresa Conrad, did you know her?
Teresa.
Oh yeah, she's died before you were
There
born.
were two. I knew a Teresa Conrad, but not this one.
Not this one. This
No.
one, yeah.
But the one I knew, they left. I mean, she and her brothers left. Their parents stayed here, but they and her brothers left.
Okay. Burnett Bader?
Burnett Bader.
Bader.
Yeah, well, that was an infant too, 33. But there is, this Herman was a brother to my grandfather.
Gottlieb?
Yeah,
Maria.
Gottlieb and Sophia. And she come to this country just, you know, they were married and had one daughter, but I know absolutely nothing of her family. I mean, they stayed back in Russia. And did she have a large family or didn't she have any? I don't know.
That's Sophia?
Yes.
Did they have kids when you were?
Oh yes, well, this gentleman that's still living in town, that's 98, and that's one of their sons.
Okay.
And not the youngest one. I mean, they had younger ones than that.
In the back, there's Gottlieb.
Gottlieb Herman, he's the son here, and he was married to Alma, and she was a Chanky, Emil Chanky, my brother-in-law's sister. She is still living. I mean, she's living down with her daughter in Yankton, South Dakota.
Okay.
But she was 90 here in her last birthday in March, I think.
Yep.
But she's not in real good shape. I mean, they went to Texas for many winters when her husband was still living, and then she did too. She went down to Texas until I think last year was the first time that she wasn't in any shape to go down. Now these people,
Don't know.
I don't know. I mean, they're part of this Conrad family, but
But you never knew.
I
Really.
didn't. No.
How about Gall? You met
Gall. Well, Rose Gall was a sister to Emil Chanke, and and well, and they had a son with what the heck? Not, you know, one of those muscle diseases that he could never sit up, and I mean he lived to be about 20, I think, and but their daughter lives in Fargo, and she's married to a gentleman by the name of Wiedmer, and they have made it big. A couple of years ago, he left $500,000 to Jamestown College alumni.
Oh my goodness.
They're in the real estate business over there, and they just have made money that they can't spend it fast enough.
Oh my goodness.
And I mean, he just come from a family that maybe helped him get through college, and that was about the extent. I mean, there was no money from way back like in some families. Yeah, well, these Conrads, they were, yeah, this guy William, I can remember him some. But when he was buried, he was brought back here from someplace, I don't know.
So was he
But-
around when you were growing up?
Yes, and he was also a cousin to Emil Chanke, to my brother-in-law. You know, their mother was no, their father is a Conrad. He was a brother to Emil's mother. Yeah. Yeah, I can remember he come by here one time and stopped at my brother-in-law's, and you know, he had been in the army, and he brought a German bride back from Germany
Really?
in the Second World War. Yeah. Oh, there, you know, that happened quite a few times
Oh,
around.
like what they call them war brides?
Yeah, that's, you know, a couple of years ago we were on a fall foliage tour to the East Coast, and part of that was a cruise around, you know, where Staten Island is there, and that, and you know, we didn't stop at Ellis Island, you know, where a lot of these people came through. If you look at records, and my dad's name would have been there because he came through Staten Island. And then you know, we were on this, taking this cruise around the ship, and there was some young gal there, and, you know, talked with a German accent. I liked to talk, so I broke, you know, I started a conversation with her, and I asked where she was from, and, you know, of course, she was from Germany. And she said, well, where was I from? Well, I said, North Dakota. You've probably never heard. Oh, yes, she said, I got married to a guy from North Dakota. But I'm not married to him anymore, so it was one of those deals. She just wanted a trip to the U.S. But a small world, I mean, yeah. Yeah, that's Conrad family. That's, yeah, the father to that,
William.
yeah. And
This
there's,
looks like the Conrad
there's,
family.
yeah, they kind of sort of, you know, they started out and then, you know, yeah, well, yeah, this family there's some old buildings sitting there, they used to live over there. And that Otto was the son of these, and well, Holder just died in '98, but they had moved out to California. They just brought him back here for burial. I guess it was cheaper to send them back here than to buy a plot out there. And that gentleman was never married. He was, well, for a long year, he was a grave digger. He'd go out and dig these graves for $5.
Really?
$5 was a lot of money in those days, but boy, that was a hard work
That
too.
was, yeah, I can, especially if it was in the winter.
Yeah.
Walter,
Well, I don't know that through all those years that they ever, you know, later on, the funeral home kept some of them, you know, in storage until, but years ago, they were buried no matter how cold it was out here.
Walter Mock. Did you
Mock,
know those
yeah.
that family at all?
Well, they were interrelated to those Conrads.
Okay.
I think this is a son of him, but his mother was a Conrad, I think. Because he didn't get very old, 1912 to 1914. And then Henry, yeah, well, oh,
Henry
yeah.
and Hugo. They're
Henry, no, 19 February, no. I mean, I know the name, I know where the families lived, but I did not know them. Yeah.
Gottlieb and Ida Miller.
Miller, well, that was some more of that Miller family, but I, uh, I remember one of those Miller families had a daughter my age, and I can remember going to the funeral with my folks for that, because that was something completely, a young person like that dying, and that sticks in my memory. I can still remember that, seeing that kid in that casket, and she was only, well, no, that isn't hers, the parents.
No, this is Clifford.
Oh
Clifford.
yeah, but this was a sister to
A sister
him.
to-
She died of a, oh, what do they call it now? Water on the brain, or some kids that are born and the head is way out of shape. And in those days, well, I mean, she didn't live very long. She just died.
I think this was another Herman over here.
Yes, I remember this. This
Brother Emma and Benjamin.
Benjamin. Yes, he was the son of that Gottlieb Herman family that I was talking about there.
Okay.
A cousin to my mother. He got killed in a tragic tractor accident. He got tangled up in a power takeoff, and he wasn't very old,
No, he was what, 30 something.
30 something, yeah. And in those days, he got his leg tore off in a power takeoff accident, and they took him up to Jamestown, and they amputated a stump to get rid of, because blood poisoning was setting in, and then they hadn't got all of it, and then years ago, if you got blood poisoning before penicillin, there wasn't anything they could do about it. You died, and that's how he died. I mean, today it'd be no problem. Yeah, that was tragic. I mean, a young family. They had a young son, and he had just got a start in farming, and he was an aggressive, hard-working man. Maybe that's what did him in, because he stepped over a spinning power takeoff without a shield on it.
Did his wife ever remarry?
No, she moved to Minneapolis, and she died in '83, and she still got a son living in Minneapolis. He comes back here once in a while to visit relatives. I kind of grew up with him. He was pretty much my age, but he got married to he come back here for a visit one time. They had moved to Minneapolis, probably lived down there 5-10 years, and he come back and he got acquainted with some local gal and he got married to her. And they're still living in Minneapolis, but of course they're not young anymore. They're my age, pretty close. So.
This is a really old headstone.
Yeah. Well, that's Magdalena Mock Sievert. Yeah, well, I remember, 81, that isn't that long ago. But she was a widow for a long time.
1889 to 1932.
Yeah. He was the husband to that Magdalena. She got remarried, Magdalena Mock, and then she married a Sievert.
Okay.
But she lived here in town to quite a ripe old age, yeah. 81, 10, yeah. She was 91 years old, huh?
Yeah.
But somebody, I don't know who the sculpture was, that's petrified wood.
Yeah.
You find that stuff around here, that's trees, and with the wood from trees gets next to some type of alkali soil, and then instead of rotting, it petrifies. Out in the Black Hills and places like that, you find a lot of it. But I'm sure this was all picked up around here.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember we picked some up, and there's some pretty good size. We had a piece that was about this big, and it was just the way that tree had been chopped off, and it just petrified and stayed like that.
Huh.
Now, I don't know, did it take a certain kind of a tree that petrified, or I don't know. I mean, it's... yeah.
Look at this one over here, and that's the only one I don't think we looked at before.
Yeah.
A vetter?
Yeah, there used to be, when I first started school, there was still a family living in the area by the name of Vetter. But no, Mary, yeah, that was a child, I suppose, that while they were living here was buried because there's nobody else by that name, Mary. But I think this child's mother was some relation of those Conrads, if I remember right.
So they're still burying people out here though because
Oh yes,
2006.
it's an open cemetery. Yeah, I mean you got to register with the state if you want to keep it open, but as long as you maintain it, there's no problem.
Are you and your wife going to be buried out here, do you think, or?
Well, right now we're not going to be buried. We're going to live forever.
Well, yeah, of course, of course.
No, we've made arrangements with UND to donate our bodies to the medical school.
Really? That's great. That's not that he's going to die anytime soon
Yeah.
either, but that's what he wants to have
Yeah,
done.
no, we made those arrangements with the funeral home and even all the hospitals we've ever been in. We've got a signed statement that they don't send us. But I mean, in order to go there, a mortuary still has to embalm you because it might take
A while for
yeah.
that to
Yeah. I mean, there's been some people have done it here, and you got two ways of going. If that might be a year, 2 years down the road until they dispose of you, and then you can have the ashes brought back here, or they've got a plot at UND where all the ashes. And we've made the arrangement. I don't want to stir up trouble for the kids when I'm gone a year or so, and then bring all that back. So we're gonna put a marker by my folks there for remembrance.
Oh, that's
and,
a good idea.
yeah.